Welcome back to Truth Empowered Relationships. Here's an important note. In the final chapter of this session, I used the words resensitize and resensitized multiple times. I meant to use the words desensitize and desensitized. You'll see the sun going down. I must have gotten tired. Please make this adjustment as you watch and as you contemplate your prep work. Thanks. Hi, I'm Marshall Zweig. I'm back with Truth Empowered Relationships Session 2. I'm calling it It's Wise to Resensitize. Now, first of all, welcome back. Secondly, you will see that I am wearing a Detroit Lions shirt. I have a Detroit Lions podcast. Going back to episode 1 of that, I talked about the stuff I talked about in session 1 with my father, and my podcast partner David, my longtime friend, talks about issues he had with his dad. I want to talk about resensitizing, because I talked about how through my father's actions and other things that happened in my life, I got desensitized. And you may be thinking, well, I don't really feel like I was desensitized. Well, I ask you, please reserve that opinion until at least I get done with this session, and then see what you believe about it. So let me start with what I mean by resensitizing and desensitizing. I mean this. I believe the path to a sleeping life is by desensitizing. And desensitizing means feeling less and less and thinking more and more. I firmly believe this is a detrimental way for humans to live, and it is wholly and completely unsupportive of any human's ability to thrive. And the path to a waking life and a live life, I believe, is by reversing desensitization, by returning from thinking to feeling. Underneath thoughts are emotions. Emotions come first. Thoughts come second. By returning our focus to our feelings, our minds quiet. Now, maybe not at first, because somewhere along the way, most of us have thought, I'm not feeling that anymore because it's too painful, or because I won't let them win, or because I'm in control and I decide. Well, I say you can't decide what to feel and what not to feel. That concept is simply an illusion of the mind. And when we give the mind control, we lose our ability to flow with life, which is what sensitivity is. I have said this to many humans over the years. The Buddha, sitting up on that mountaintop, smiling, right? Smiling. I always see the picture. Big smile on his face. The Buddha is not smiling because they're feeling nothing. This enlightened master is smiling because he's feeling everything. He's feeling everything, and he's okay with it. Emotions are a part of the human condition. Emotions are a part of a human condition. So he's grown comfortable with every emotion. He's grown comfortable feeling uncomfortable. Mastery of emotions is to feel them without being them, to be a clear channel for the stream inside you and me and everybody to flow, just like a garden hose. Now you kink up the garden hose, and not only does the water stop flowing, but the pressure builds up. So if you keep that garden hose kinked up long enough, what happens? It explodes. And I'm giggling at the thought of the water exploding. But inside us, there's nothing funny about an explosion. We all know about gun violence in this country. We all know about interpersonal hatred that's grown in this world. That's because these garden hoses are kinked up with the idea of insensitivity. Truth-empowered relationships sets up relationships to support both parties in resensitizing. Now, I told you last session, after my dad said, "Don't be sad, there are people in wheelchairs," after I survived sexual trauma, I blocked out sadness. I actually was like, okay, well, I want to be a good boy and do what my dad says. I blocked out sadness to the point where I believed my body wasn't going to die. And remember I said emotional unwellness is the same thing as mental illness? Let me read that again to you, because that one's in my notes. I blocked out sadness by the way, I will be reading from notes at times, because these are sessions that I've had before, and I don't want to miss the content. we're getting to a lot of new stuff as well, but that's why I'm reading. Anyway, I blocked out sadness, get this again, to the point where I believed my body was not going to die. I would say this, I really like this human being, she just passed, named Louise Hay. I like her because she's very well-intentioned. She understands that dis-ease, she actually uses that term, may have even coined it, but dis-ease the word of it comes from dis-ease, being ill at ease, which we're talking about. But Louise comes from a place of decoding the mysteries that the body has and moving forward. But it can be used by the mind. There was something that was happening inside me, some dis-ease I was experiencing, and the phrase to heal from that is, I am on an endless journey through eternity, and there's plenty of time. And I remember the first time I said that to myself, I think I was leaving, or maybe it wasn't the first time, but it was the time I remember strongly. I was late to get to an airport. The only flight I think I ever missed. I am on an endless journey through eternity, and there's plenty of time. Well, it depends on what you believe about souls. I actually believe we are infinite. But our bodies, as of yet, because science has done some pretty amazing things, technology has done some pretty amazing things, as of yet, our bodies are going to die. And that's, even as I say it to you, I'm like, I don't really want to say this to people. It's like throwing a grenade into the room. But I couldn't even contemplate the idea of dying. And I remember being young, laying in my grass like this, and looking up at the clouds slowly moving by and saying to myself, I've got so much time. I had the concept of dying in my reality, but I lost it along the way because of that link to don't be sad, there are people in wheelchairs. Dying is sad. In death, like any ending, there's sadness. Death is sad. Death is a part of life. There was this artist, interesting guy, because his name's Billy Joel, and he was big in the 70s when I was really young, and a bit in the 80s. He was dominant in terms of his record sales. And his last pop song was called Famous Last Words. It was like the 90s. And he said, this is the last song I'm ever going to write. He just wrote a new song with some younger songwriters, and he performed on the Grammys that just passed, the one where Taylor Swift won her third best album Grammy? I think that's the record. Anyway, Billy Joel once wrote a song called Say Goodbye to Hollywood. And he has a lot of lines in his songs that are interesting. They're poems, you know. In the song Say Goodbye to Hollywood, he says, life is a series of hellos and goodbyes. So like I said, death is a part of life. Life is a series of hellos and goodbyes. And isn't it, though, you know? So, my point is life is inherently sad. And if a human being can't or won't feel their sadness, well, I say, and I know this from experience, their perception of reality is skewed. Believing I will live forever in this body, at this point in time, scientifically and technologically, is not a sane belief. I acquired, and I'm telling you, I still have to put effort into this is going to happen to me. It's hard for me to believe. Now, could I be intuitive and be seeing some change in the future scientifically? Maybe. But I remember disconnecting from that because I wasn't allowed to feel sad. So that is what I mean by being desensitized. I acquired this belief because I became desensitized. And I say sane and sensitive are linked, just like insane and insensitive are linked. I say the way out and back to emotional wellness, mental wellness, is to resensitize. And that's why I'm an intimacy and resensitization therapist. It's important. Nothing like what happened to you has happened to me, you might be saying. In other words, the things things I've told you that sound, let's say, serious versus less serious. And by the way, instantly a way to desensitize. Well, he's a survivor of sexual trauma. I'm not. That's like my dad saying, don't be sad, there are people in wheelchairs. When we start to compare and evaluate, desensitization. And I'll start pointing it out to you. Look how easily it happens. I say we've all been taught repeatedly to avoid, suppress, resist, and deny our emotions. Now I'm going to prove it to you. Let's say you're sharing something you're troubled about with someone. Have you ever heard these kind of responses? Well, you're not perfect either. You always have to be right. You think you're so smart. This is how you treat me after all I've done for you? Any of these sound familiar? Pardon me, I have this repetitive itch on my nose. So like I said, I'm extremely authentic. My nose keeps itching. I'm going to scratch it. I'm sorry if it's distracting. But think about those. If you've heard those statements, it's pretty obvious they sting. And whatever you shared, if somebody says, this is how you treat me after all I've done for you, for example, whatever you shared, whatever you did, it's not received with any sort of consideration. These kinds of responses are desensitizing, and they're not the only ones that are. Because you might be saying, no one's ever talked to me like that either. Okay, watch this one. Have they ever talked to you like this? Don't worry about it. Everything will work out in the end. Everything happens for a reason. I can do more, but these responses don't sound overtly mean, do they? And yet, they desensitize us without us even realizing it. There's this old adage, may or may not be true, but the point of it is fascinating. If you drop a frog into lukewarm water, let me back up. If you drop a frog into boiling, wait a minute, how does that work? If you drop a frog into water that's boiling, it hops out. But if you drop a frog into lukewarm water and slowly bring it to a boil, the frog will boil to death because he is not recognizing the incremental differences that are slowly killing him. Hang on, that's an alarm. Let me turn my phone off. Sorry about that. Not recognizing these incremental differences. That's what desensitization is. It happens to us bit by bit. Cheer up. Look on the bright side. But wait a minute now. I'm sad right now. I don't need to look on the bright side. I need to feel my sadness until it's over. Here are more responses. I had an analogy to another TV show, but you'll get to know me and you'll see I go there a lot with analogies from entertainment. But I'm going to wager some of these you've heard. I just said cheer up, look on the bright side. Let's do a few more of you. A few of these that have desensitized you without you realizing it. Like that frog getting the heat up turned on it. It was just a joke. I was just kidding. I wrote a children's play that, to my great honor and relief, has been performed in, it's been translated into 3 languages. I'm very proud of this. And it's been performed in elementary schools across the country for over 20 years. I think closing in on 25 years. I wrote it when I was young. And even when I say when I was young, I get super sad. I wrote it when I was young because I was very aware of the idea there was a particular relative who would say that to me, say these things to me. And I was very aware of the desensitizing effect they had. So it was a joke. I was just kidding. You're too sensitive. Now, I should tell you, I should have told you in session 1, I am an HSP, a highly sensitive S person, P. And I got these statements in my life, like you're too sensitive. At this point in human wisdom, being a highly sensitive person is considered a gift. But when I was young, it was a reason to get mocked and humiliated and desensitized. So, you're too sensitive might be one you've heard. You're overreacting. You always blow things out of proportion. It's no big deal. Sorry for the itch again. Why are you making such a big thing about this? Get over it. Here's one I heard recently. Deal with it. Look on the bright side. That's the toxic positivity I was talking about. Cheer up. Find the silver lining. That's another one. Others have it worse. That's my dad saying, don't be sad, there are people in wheelchairs. You're overthinking things. You analyze too much. Any of these resonating with you? I dare say, there's this wonderful program called Challenge Day, and I'll talk about it in a later session. But at one point in the program, you have to cross a line, and they ask about painful events in people's lives. If you've ever, or if you're a child, it's in elementary schools, or actually I think it might be middle school or high schools. I can't remember. It's later. So I'm going to say it's high schools. And they would say, like, if you're a child of divorce, step across the line. People walk across. If you have a relative who's died, step across the line, step across the line. And they ask all sorts of things. You know, do you have a friend who's experienced cancer? Whatever these things are. After a while, everybody's on this side. If there's one or two people over here, it's a surprise. And we're all looking at each other. And the point is, we've all experienced pain. But when we get these kinds of responses that I just said, like that frog in the water, over your lifetime, those responses desensitize you without you even realizing it, just like the frog. So contemplate this. You probably already did as I went through it. Just contemplate this for a second. What phrases like this have you heard? And do you remember any that really bothered you or shook you up or confused you? There's probably some I didn't mention. But for some of you, you're getting my point. Avoiding, suppressing, resisting, denying. All these phrases and ways of interacting with people bit by bit. And by the way, where do they come from? Let me throw that question to you and I'm going to answer it. Where would someone come up with, deal with it? That's someone who at some point in their lives got desensitized too. And instead of realizing it, they're trying to perpetrate it on other people. They're trying to do what was done unto them. And we're going to talk about that. That's one of the pillars of truth-empowered relationships. What you would not have done unto yourself, do not do unto others. It's not called that in truth-empowered relationships, but we'll get there. So all the phrases, bit by bit, experience by experience, they desensitize us. Now, let's talk for a second because, like, you might be saying to yourself, okay, fine, but it is what it is. That's potentially one too. It also can be very wise because it is what it is. And we're going to talk about meanings people make up. All something is what it is. The meanings we attach come from different places. But you might be saying, okay, it happened to me. What am I going to do about it? Well, before I help you through it, because we're going to do that as well, I want to talk to you about the cost of living life desensitized. 1, aliveness. Aliveness. What do I mean by aliveness? Well, do you remember that life, do you have an experience, I should say, of life being more intense when you were a kid? Do you remember the simple delight, pardon me scratching my nose, I'll start again. Do you remember the simple delight of running through a sprinkler? Do you remember, like I talked about, that enveloping peace of laying in the grass, watching the clouds move by? You remember that feeling? And the smell of the grass and the feeling like you're not exactly laying on the ground because the grass crumples up, but it's still kind of lifting you just the tiniest bit off the ground. The terror of calling someone you have a crush on for the first time or texting them. The feelings you had when you were young, I say they're stronger. Now, some people will tell you it's chemical and it's hormonal. I say they were stronger because even though you had experiences, like we all do, which led you to avoid, suppress, resist, and deny your emotions. I call my catch-all phrase for that is putting on the brakes. The brakes were still new. The brakes hadn't worn out yet. They were still new. Okay, I got desensitized. I can get right back to being a kid. Natural resilience, let's call it. More naturally resilient, because that's what kids are. They haven't been desensitized to the point where they're stopped from feeling. But if you put on the brakes or ride the brakes, you know what riding the brakes is? When you're like always halfway on the brakes and halfway off, and the people behind you see your brake light turning on like that. So if you apply the brakes, sorry if that was too loud for you. If you apply the brakes, or if you ride those brakes long enough, and assuming you don't have an electric car where the brakes work with a reverse propulsion, but everybody still knows at this point what brakes are. You ride those brakes, you put on the brakes, the feeling of being alive diminishes. There's a loss of pleasure. There's a loss of joy. And you put on a song you used to love, and you're like, I used to love the song. Why do I feel nothing? Why do I feel nothing? There's this old song that, there's a handful of songs through the ages that stand the test of time. And this one's called Desperado by a group called the Eagles. A guy named Don Henley, I think, wrote it. And he was young. He was like 20 years old when he wrote it. Listen to this line. You're losing all your highs and lows. Ain't it funny how the feeling goes away? So that's somebody who got desensitized and was aware that it was happening to them. So what happens when you avoid, suppress, resist, and deny? First, there's a loss of pleasure and there's a loss of joy. Secondly, pardon me scratching my nose, there's physical tension. I talked about Louise Hay saying dis-ease. There's physical tension when you avoid, suppress, resist, deny emotions. And instead of resolving that tension, we learn deep breathing. We learn mindfulness techniques. Now you'll hear my voice as I'm poo-pooing it. There's certainly benefit to these things. But it's the benefit of, I'm going to pull a weed out by its leaves, not by its roots. Well, it's going to keep growing back. We're addressing the symptom, not the root cause. So how do we put the brakes on emotions? What do? It's very simple. We tense up. And the spine, I'm a trauma-informed coach. I have diagnosed PTSD. And one of the sets of people I coach are content moderators. I don't know if you know what they are, but content moderators go on the internet and pull illegal content off the internet for various different corporations or entities. So I coach them because they develop PTSD from seeing these things because their fight or flight mechanism doesn't go off. They have to sit there for, let's say it's ringing saying, usually we'd say, close that computer. They got to stay for 7 hours and 58 more minutes or 59 minutes and 50 seconds more. So they live in a constant state of tension. For many people, like that was like their childhood, right? It simply wasn't safe to feel. But when we live a life with tension, even once potentially, without the wisdom to know how to let go of the tension, it can alter our perspective potentially for a lifetime. You tense up that antenna and suddenly you're getting a different signal. And you can't figure out what happened to the signal I used to get. And we start looking for doctors and we look for treatments because the tension manifests as dis-ease. Like I said, Louise Hay talked about. The disease takes root. Nothing seems to help. The only way out of the cycle, I say, and remember, try these things on. If this resonates, then all it takes is resensitizing, allowing your emotions to flow freely again. That's the key word, flow freely again, because they used to. There was a psychological study done that said that hiding or denying feelings leads to more stress on the body and increased difficulty avoiding the distressing thoughts and feelings. Let me say that again. Hiding or denying feelings leads to more stress on the body and increased difficulty avoiding the distressing thoughts and feelings. We talk about, if you have ever had these, the name itself will resonate with you. Intrusive thoughts. They'll just keep popping in. The more you try to run, they follow you. There was an old Bugs Bunny, assuming you know Bugs Bunny, the sarcastic rabbit. And the bad guy in the cartoon was looking for something. And Bugs kept going, he's not in here, he's not in there, whatever it was, knowing that because I say it's not in there, well, that's where you want to look. So that's essentially that. The research participants were divided into two groups and shown disturbing medical procedure films while their stress responses were measured. They measured the heart rates, the pupil dilation, the sweat production. The first group of subjects was asked to watch the videos while they let their emotions show. Okay? The second group was asked to watch the films and act as if nothing was bothering them. What happened? The participants who suppressed their emotions, acting as if nothing bothered them, had significantly more physiological body arousal. The emotional suppressors may have appeared cool and calm, but on the inside, the stress was bubbling like a volcano. Here's the third cost: limiting yourself. You avoid pain and you avoid discomfort so that you can stay safe. You limit yourself. You never put yourself in a situation where you'll be triggered, and that means you have to avoid a lot of experiences. And again, I coach these content moderators, and that is not uncommon with them. Too many triggers because they're going out having lived 8 hours watching horrible things happen. And they have to do it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday too. It's a tough job. So that's what happens when you let anxiety lead your life. You avoid these triggers. Pardon me for scratching my nose. And anxiety is a feeling that's designed to help you avoid feelings you don't like. Anxiety is a feeling that's designed to help you avoid feelings you don't like. Anxiety can be very supportive at times, but when anxiety is put in charge of your reality, it will lead to emotional stagnation. Number 4, you miss out on being a better partner. You miss out on being a better parent. You miss out on being a better sibling. You miss out on being a better friend. To be those things requires sensitivity. I talked about do unto others as you would have done unto you, and what you would not have done unto yourself, do not do unto others. We're going to talk about those things. But both of them, because they're two of the pillars in truth and power relationships. We don't spend a lot of time on the pillars, but I want you to be able to have a way not just to structure your relationship, but to find the relationship that you want to be in if the relationship you're in or lack of relationship you're in isn't working for you. So that'll come too. Mindful of the time. I want to keep these to 30 minutes. So, but both of the things I just said, do unto others and what you would not have done unto yourself, they both require sensitivity. The sensitivity to know what you like done unto you and to know what you don't like done unto you. So, but what's the benefit of knowing those things? Well, if you're aware of both what you like and also what you don't like being done to you, you'll break any cycle of abuse that exists in your family history. If you aren't aware, you're more likely to continue that cycle of abuse. And number 5, to be able to keep yourself safe. There's an inability to keep yourself safe. Now, Peter Levine, I've studied a little bit with him, and I found his writing fascinating. Let me tell you who this guy is. Before Peter, the fight or flight response, which is actually, I prefer the term acute stress response. It was just called the fight or flight response because it was binary. Fight or flight when it goes off. But in reality, Peter Levine introduced freezing. And the minute I tell people this who have never heard it, they're like, it's like that end of the Sixth Sense. They're like, oh my gosh, I've been frozen so much of my life. Freezing, tension. That's what freezing is, tension, right? There's also fainting, which is where you just kind of give up and do whatever you're told. And then there's also fawning, which is trying desperately to please. So it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or faint. So there's 4 choices now. I'll tell you, there's so many stories. I have notes, and I write like 1-word notes about stories I can tell you. But keeping yourself safe requires sensitivity. Boy, oh boy, I'm just thinking about the clock. Let me do this last one, and next session maybe I'll continue this a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit over. Let me talk to you about a story about Deepak Chopra. Deepak Chopra, a spiritual leader. I once read a book that he wrote the foreword for it. I think it's called Keep Yourself Safe. I can't remember. But he told about 2 stories that he was involved with. 2 times he was approached potentially violently. Now, once he was staying at Hotel 1, and his seminar that he was leading was in Hotel 2. And behind the 2 was an alley. He had to go through the alley. So he cuts through 3 guys with knives, jumping. And they say, give us your wallet. And he said, inside, now remember, this guy, let's assume that he is, I don't know Deepak Chopra, but let's assume that he lets his emotions flow. He had this sense of peace come over him, complete peace. And he said, absolutely, let me get it for you. I want to tell you whatever you're going through. I wish you well on there. By the way, I saw that there's a way out that way. I don't think you'll be seen at all if you run that way. They ran away. He continued on to his seminar. Didn't even stop. Gave his speech. The second time, he hears a noise in his house. And stumbling in the doorway is what he perceived to be a rather bulky, confused-looking older man. And instantly, terror went over him. He grabbed, as I recall, who knows why would you have a bat laying around, but some sharp instrument, let's pretend it was a bat. He ran to the door and in an instant clubbed the guy who fell backwards into his shrubs. The guy had murdered multiple people. So, that's a cost of not being sensitive. It's not a cost we think about. Sensitive means, oh, let me get the door for you. No, sensitive means keeping yourself alive when you need to, knowing which ones aren't reasons to worry and which ones are. And let me just briefly do the 6th one, and then we're going to wrap up. I'll come up with some prep work that you can work on until you decide to go to the next session. The 6th one is what I talked about. Mental illness. My reality is this. Where there is not emotional wellness, there is mental illness. To the extent that you avoid, suppress, resist, and deny your emotions, they turn into thoughts, which can turn into beliefs, and believing your mind over your senses. And that's, in fact, what I believe, and I say, most mental illnesses are. Maybe even all. Maybe the chemicals are affected by these things. And you don't have to believe me. You can say it's chemical. But I say it's not. I say it's not. I'll tell you a story. Oh, geez. Where are we? 32. I told you last session, my mom and I have worked through stuff. It took some very, very difficult. It took me multiple times texting her, I'm struggling psychologically to get through to where we are. And it's a conversation, multiple conversations, that psychologists would recommend not to have. But I had enough faith in my mom's ability to love, because I'd seen it with my mom and dad, and we'll get to that in another session. I'm sure multiple times. My mom, when I was little, used to mock me at times, assuming and I grew up knowing her mom. I believe it was something that was passed down in the family. And it came out of her. I remember it coming out of her very surprisingly. We didn't talk about it ever before several years back. Well, she would come into my house and she would mumble to herself over and over. My mom's Jewish. The rabbi told me that humiliating someone is the most terrible crime of all. The rabbi told, and it sounded so crazy. But then I listened, and it was her conscience. Again, if you have something like that, well, deep down, when it was happening, she had a conscience. And I saw the way she treated her mom. Her mom, who used to say things like this, mocking things, she treated her with respect as she got older. I could tell my perception, and I've worked hard on the distinction between perception and making up a story in your head, was that she got frustrated many times, and probably a lot of other emotions. But she managed to stay respectful. Well, now here she is, an older woman, and we had never talked about this, and she's mumbling this. And so, bit by bit, I talked to her about what had happened, which she had forgotten that she did to me. But she'll forever have my respect for saying, I don't remember it, but it sounds like me. I believe you. I believe it happened, which was very, I can't even describe the word, but something very heartfelt. She never says that phrase anymore. She never says the phrase about humiliating someone. It's gone. It's gone. And you can say, what a peculiar thing. Jesus, she sounded mentally ill. Oh, yeah? She never says it anymore. So that's what I mean. Are there things that I could be wrong about? Possibly. Possibly. Sure. Sure there is. But if you're here, that means you wanted to learn about relationships. That means you want more love in your life. And that means you're sane enough to be sensitive. So whatever you're experiencing, if there is a characteristic and a flavor of mental illness, I say that is a sixth possibility that can happen when you resensitize. When you resensitize. Sane comes from the Latin word sanus, which means healthy. Sensitive comes from the Latin word sensus, sentire, to feel or to perceive. In truth-empowered relationships, we lose our minds and come to our senses. Resensitizing means rehumanizing. There's a reason there are hundreds of emotion words in every language. I think 4,000, if I remember right, in English, because it's something we all have in common. I'll end on this. Well, I'll rush through, but this is a neat story. I'm at 36, so give me 4 more minutes. 5, just so I don't lie. Yeah, I want to always tell the truth. Okay. Most of us know the song It's a Small World. Walt Disney opened up Disneyland, and he didn't have the right song for this ride called It's a Small World. It was not called that yet. But what he wanted was national anthems from every country. But when you rode through the ride, it just sounded like a cacophony of sound. It made no sense. It was nonsense. So he asked the Sherman Brothers, who wrote the music for Mary Poppins, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, if you happen to know that obscure one, but most people know Mary Poppins. He said, will you write a song that they can listen to it will get translated to multiple languages as they ride through the ride? And they came back with this song, It's a Small World. And they said, Mr. Disney, we wrote this to be a prayer. Now listen to this, because I am very, very spiritual. I would not call myself religious. I believe in bits and pieces of every religion. I'm very highly spiritual. Listen to these words. It's a world of laughter, a world of tears. It's a world of hopes and a world of fears. It's a world of laughter, a world of tears, a world of hopes, and a world of fears. There's so much that we share. There's so much that we have in common. This is one of my fundamental beliefs. I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. I don't care what the color of your skin is. We are all human beings having a human experience. We all know what it's like to feel. We all know what it's like to laugh, to have tears, to have hopes, to have fears. And I say you've got to allow those things to flow. There's more I want to say, and I'm flying through my notes as I talk. Let me wrap up by saying this. There may have been times in your life where you have gotten resensitized. And that's what I want you to contemplate before next session. All the times in your life, you can write them all down. Don't do more than 100. But if you have more than one, that would be great. 100, because we can do an exercise a long time ago with 100 moments. Some people might write down 2, 3, 5. Some might write down hundreds. We all have been resensitized in a given way. And learning the common language of sensitivity is part of what is going to give you unparalleled success in your relationships. It's as simple as that. This is a step toward it. So this is prep work. Now, I could go on and on. Let me save this for the next session. But from now until then, contemplate the ways and moments in which you were resensitized. and bring them to the next session so that I can ask you questions about them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I am here for you. I am energized by you. Even if we have not met and never meet, I am blessed by your presence and graced by your presence. Thank you for giving me your time. I'm out. See you next session.